is Mandira. Welcome to AglaSem, and today we are going to be studying Class 11, Chapter 1, What is Psychology? So before I start this chapter, let me give you a brief introduction on what we are actually going to study in this chapter. So first, of course, we discuss the meaning of psychology, what all it studies, what it aims to study, then whether the discipline has been influenced more by sciences, that is natural sciences or social sciences. Then again, we move on to understanding mind and behavior and the various kind of branches of psychology. What job will you get if you work as a psychologist? Can you work in an office? Can you work in a hospital? Etc. etc. So if you have any of these kind of questions, please watch the video because we're going to answer every question and I hope I'm able to explain it to you very well. So let's start on with the chapter, what is psychology? So a lot of people, and that's like a lot of people, think that psychologists are people who are able to read minds, right? Or like a lot of people will come and say, oh, psychoanalyze me as soon as I'm sitting in front of you. So is that what psychology is? Reading other people's minds? That's it? So yeah, well, sadly, it's not just that. In fact, it's not at all that. Psychology comes from two words. Those are Greek words, psyche meaning soul and logos meaning science, which means that it is the study of the soul. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means it studies everything that goes on in our heads, everything that is making us perform certain actions, based on the thoughts that are going on in our heads. What does that mean? That means that according to NCERT, the definition of psychology is defined as a science which studies mental processes, experiences, and behavior and in different contexts. So there are three terms that we need to focus on here. The first one is mental processes. What is a mental process? Well, let me give you an example of a mental process. What is 21 plus 21? As soon as I said that, in most of our minds, we basically shaped a 21 and then put a 21 beneath it and then tried to calculate it into a 42. Well, essentially what you did right now is a mental process. So any kind of process that takes place in your head, भले आप addition कर रहे हैं, subtraction कर रहे हैं, not limited to mathematical sciences, anything can be a thought. For example, if I tell you to think about your favorite flavor of cake, might be chocolate, might be vanilla, might be pineapple, it's popping up in your head. So you are thinking about cake, right? That is a mental process. So there are many kinds of mental processes that we go through, and that is one of the founding stones of psychology. The second founding stone is experiences. Now, what are experiences? Experiences are something that is very subjective in nature. So basically, आपने बहुत लोगों को ये बात बोलते हुए सुना होगा that सबके experiences अलग-अलग होते हैं. For example, if you're talking to someone about the quality of a restaurant, say, okay, did you eat Chinese there? How was your experience at that Chinese restaurant? That means his experience is subject to his own nature. So everybody's experiences are different. It is basically what we go through. The time that we spend at a certain topic, at a certain place with someone, that all counts as experiences. And obviously, regardless to say, everyone's experiences will be different according to their own characteristics, according to the nature of the conversation. बहुत सारी चीजें हैं जो experience को affect कर सकती हैं. So it is a very common word that's used and also a big pillar of what psychology is based on. Now, the third pillar that psychology is based on is behavior. What is behavior? It is the response or reaction we make or activities we engage in, right? For example, I do this. So a lot of you will blink. I think most of you will blink. This is a type of a behavior. If I'm taking this online class, it's type of a behavior. If you're attending an online class, that is also a type of behavior. So anything we are engaging ourselves in, anything we are performing, all that comes under the umbrella term of behaviors. Now, behaviors can be of two kinds. They can be covert or overt. So, overt behaviors are those that are visible on the outside. For example, my hand movements, what I'm talking, it's all visible on the outside, right? So, overt comes, basically how I learn overt and covert is out in the open. So, O for overt, O for open. So, whatever is out in the open is an overt behavior. What is a covert behavior? It is whatever is hidden. For example, if I'm speaking on a certain topic, I might be experiencing a bit of anxiety while I'm doing so, right? But that anxiety might not be visible to you. Now, that is a covert behavior because you don't know whether I'm experiencing it or not. It's hidden. So, it is covered. C for covered, C for covert. So anytime you want to remember them using these tricks. Covert, covered, overt, open. That's what the two kinds of behaviors are. So moving on to the next subheading. What is psychology as a discipline? Now, what must be going on in your mind is these mental processes, these experiences, and these behaviors. This is something we do in daily life. So how is a psychologist different from a person who is just living his daily life? A lot of people might observe certain kind of experiences, certain kind of mental processes. Obviously, हम अपने आप में भी observe करते हैं that, oh, what is going on in my mind today, or what kind of behavior I'm doing today, is it good or bad, in the open or not in the open, overt or covert. So what exactly is the difference between a regular person and a psychologist? What's the point? Well, psychologists try to minimize biases in explanations of behavior. So psychology ka one of the aims is to explain behavior. Why people are doing what they are doing. What is motivating them? What is stopping them from doing something, etc., etc. That is just one of the aims. So that is essentially what a difference between a psychologist and a regular person is. That a psychologist will always try to explain behavior in a way that there are minimum biases. For example, I might like a chocolate cake more than a vanilla cake, right? That is my personal bias. So any topic of debate that is about which is the best cake, I will always favor a chocolate one, right? But that's the difference between me and a psychologist. Obviously, this is not a psychological question, but I'm just giving you an example that this is the type of bias that comes in everyday life. किसी भी topic पे हमारा कोई ना कोई bias होता है. It's natural that psychologists might also have a bias, but their job is to minimize that bias. Neutral होके किसी बात पर decision देना या बोलना. So obviously psychology is very much of a Western science, as it was driven from a lot of Western cultures into India. And although we are using the word science for psychology, it is still not clear which kind of science it is. Matlab, whether it's a natural science like physics, like chemistry, like biology, or whether it's a social science like history, civics, geography, that kind of bend. So because it involves both the topics, obviously some psychologists, if they go into the biological psychology field, they will use MRI, they will use EEG, they will use brain scans, they will use all those kind of tools. People are inclined to think that it might be a natural science. On the other hand, it might be a social science also, because as we said in the first line, experiences are subjective. Don't worry if you're getting confused. We're going to do these two topics now in much more detail. So let's get on to it. Psychology as a natural science. Now, as I was saying, that because the emphasis of scientific method is pretty high in psychology, everything has to be done using a scientific method, using a set method. आप अपना process खुद define नहीं कर सकते. That's why it is a lot of people are inclined to say that it is a natural science. Again, I said that a lot of psychologists also use proper scientific tools, like even questionnaires are scientific tools, and EEGs, as I said, MRIs, बहुत सारे brain scans they will use, different kinds of tests they will use. So all those branches, all those areas of psychology kind of make us inclined to sort of deduce that it's a natural science. But of course, there is more to that. They study learning, memory, attention, perception, motivation. So, for example, बहुत सारे आप आगे भी topics पढ़ेंगे, as I will explain further down the line in all the chapters. There are a lot of theories that have been developed. So, memory के बारे में भी एक theory है, that short-term memory will last this many seconds, long-term memory कैसे if you have to make it last longer. Now, what most natural scientists think is that memory की कोई भी theory है या कोई भी किसी भी topic की theory है, if it is applicable to all the human beings uniformly, then it is probably a natural science bend, right? Because as you know, अगर आपके पास कोई भी maths का formula है, or if you have any physics formula, if you can apply it to a good set of numbers, that formula can work on any number. ऐसे नहीं है कि a square plus b square वाला जो formula है, that will not work on 2 and 4, but will work on 5 and 6. So that's why mathematics is definitely a science, because one formula works for all. That is the main logic behind people saying that it is a natural science. Now let's come to the next heading, psychology as a social science. So why would people think that one formula does not apply to all? Why would people think that it's not a natural science? Well, in a wonderfully explained example by NCERT, it's given that Ranjita and Shabnam are in the same class and they I think, go to the same school as well. But one of, I think Shabnam lived with her mother in the same village, but they have very different kind of economic backgrounds. One of them comes from a richer background, one of them comes from a more, sober kind of background. So I think Shabnam's house was flooded, so Ranjita had to give her help, had to help her out, had to, make her stay in her own house, and they interacted very well. So although they might be going to the same class, to the same school, their experiences in life are very different, right? So अगर मैं बोलूं कि जो साइकोलॉजी का, मेमोरी का या लर्निंग का फॉर्मूला रंजिता पे अप्लाई होता है, शायद वो शबनम पे अप्लाई ना हो, then it won't be a very, surprising thing. Naturally, because every individual is different. So because Ranjita's experiences are so different than Shabnam, might be that any kind of theory you are using on her, or any kind of therapy for that matter you are using on her, might not work on Shabnam. So this is why everybody, like another school of thought thinks that psychology is more of a social science, because everyone's experiences are, as I said, subjective. So if there is no one formula that can be applied on everybody, then it is more inclined to be a social science. Now दोनों तरफ की debates के points तो हमने सुन ही लिए, but which do you think won? Well, the good part is that nobody won. The point is that psychology is a natural as well as a social science. It is both, because of course we need those kind of theories, that can be applied to most of the human population, that are overarching in nature. But we also need that uniqueness in psychology where we can study every individual as their own and not identical to somebody, right? So it is both a social science and a natural science. Now that is the conclusion. Moving on to the next heading, it is understanding mind and behavior. Now, a lot of people get confused about ये mind क्या होता है और ये brain क्या होता है. If I have a brain, do I also have a mind, and vice versa? Well, congratulations, you have both. There is no doubt about it. But if I have a mind, then why cannot see it? Why don't I take out a brain scan of my head and locate the mind? That is the essential difference between brain and mind. Brain has a physical entity, but mind does not have a physical entity. Mind is what is basically inside, sort of not physically, but present in the brain, and does all the mental processes, encounters all the experiences, all the behaviors are originated from there. But the brain is a physical entity. If you do a brain scan or if you do a body scan, you are likely to locate a brain but not a mind. So that's the difference. Of course, mind cannot exist without a brain, because brain is the wiring. Basically, आप ऐसा समझ लीजिए कि mind जो है, it's sort of like an engine oil and sort of an engine oil that we cannot see. But brain is basically the whole machinery that's doing all the work. It has all the wires connected in it. So that's the difference between brain and mind. So here we also discussed that a lot of people have gone through a lot of accidents that has damaged their brain, and that leads to a change in their behavior. For example, there is this very, very, very famous example in psychology. It's that of Phineas Gage. There was this person who used to work at the railway docks, and he suffered an accident and he was impaled. मतलब उसकी एक brain की area में से एक rod घुसी and it got out of the other area of the brain. So after he was impaled and suffered a horrible accident, he actually was conscious. वो उठा and he took himself to the hospital, and then after he went, it was found that a certain area of his brain was damaged so and so that his behavior completely changed. Earlier he was respectful to everybody, he never cursed, he used to be a very morally ethical person, and after the accident he became very callous, he started gambling, he started being rude to his co-workers. He basically changed a moral, as a switch uska change ho gaya. So after scientists studied his brain, they figured out that basically the accident had damaged that area of his brain that was responsible for moral decision making. So uske morals jo the wo thode idhar udhar ho gaye. So he started cursing and he started being rude, he started gambling. So that kind of effect was there on his behavior. So obviously, if there is a damage to your brain, your mind will be affected, your behaviors will be affected. So they are both interdependent terms. Mind is dependent on behavior and brain is dependent on mind is dependent on brain and brain is dependent on mind. This is a very interrelated relationship. I hope you have understood that. So now moving on to the next heading, popular notions about the discipline of psychology. That means everything you have heard. Like I was saying at the starting of the video that, oh, do psychologists read mind? This is also a popular notion about psychology. Sadly, it's false. No, we don't read minds, but we want to understand minds, predict behavior, and do a lot of more things. So, the kind of questions that a psychologist asks is, अगर कोई group में काम कर रहा है, for example, तो how do you enhance, how do you make him more productive? How do you make, you know, individuals in an organization more productive? How do you heal a mental disorder? If someone's going through a tough time and is showing symptoms of some disorder, how do you elevate that? That is the kind of questions that a psychologist asks. Now, there is a good, part about common sense versus psychology, right? So, what is the difference between common sense and psychology? आपने बहुत सारे अपने relatives को या people around you, all of you, every time we make certain predictions about the human nature. For example, you know a certain cousin or a certain friend, आपको पता है कि वो बहुत introvert है, he doesn't like interacting with other people. And if he is put or forcibly thrown into a room full of people where he has to interact with everyone, he will obviously react poorly. So ये बात तो मैं भी predict कर सकती हूँ, ये बात कोई भी predict कर सकता है. जो भी उस बंदे को अच्छे से जानता है, that person can predict it. कि oh, maybe if Arjun is sent there, he will react very poorly. Okay, that is a common sense notion, but it is not a scientific notion because there is no evidence. You are not measuring his behavior, right? So that's why we are going to talk about common sense versus scientific knowledge, that is psychological knowledge. So, for example, आपके कोई भी friend है, it is a wonderful example given by NCERT. He has moved to a certain town that is not yours, obviously. आप दिल्ली में रहते हो, for example, he has moved to Gurgaon and is now attending a different school. So there is a certain sort of distance between you guys, right? So some people might say, you know what, he has gone into another town now, he's studying in a different school, it's not going to, your friendship is not going to last, your friendship is going to become weaker, etc, etc. Some others might say, actually distance, really it helps the heart grow fonder. So if you are separated from each other, you will talk even more and you will become even closer. So these are two commonsensical notions, but nobody is taking a scientific book and tracing both those behaviors, right? So that's the difference between, now if I collect 50 students or 100 students who have moved similarly to Gurgaon and I analyze all their friendships and I collect data कि कितनों ने अपने पुराने वालों से touch रखा, in how many cases distance was better for them, in how many cases distance was worse, and I do a statistical analysis, then that is the answer to a scientific question in a scientific way. It's not common sense, right? So that is essentially the difference between common sense and our scientific knowledge. Common sense tells us to give them easy problems, right? Oh yeah, so there's another example here that is used by NCERT where it is like, oh, if you want to improve someone's performance, especially kids, अगर आपको उनकी performance improve करनी है, what kind of problems should you give them? Should you give them, for example, easy maths problems or difficult maths problems? So again, in two groups, उन्होंने ऐसे ही किया that gave them, they gave one easy problem, they gave one difficult problems. Of course, easy वालों का success rate ज़्यादा था, so they were more confident by the end of it. But what they did, a twist, was that even though difficult problems was given to the second group, they kept reassuring them that don't worry, आपका ये हो गया, don't worry अगर आपका problem नहीं हो रहा, move on to the next one, try the next one. They kept encouraging them. So clear cut result का यही था कि easy ones did better and difficult ones did poorer, right? And this is what any common sense person would have predicted. But in the later run, what happened that जिनको difficult problems मिली थी, they were actually more driven towards solving problems than the easy ones. So next time जब दोनों को difficult दी गई problems, eventually जो कि दी ही जानी थी, so difficult ones performed better rather than the easy group. So this is how psychology is different from common sense because it is, a set of experiment is done, you note everything, everything's analyzed, everything is noted. That's why, right? So I hope you have understood this topic. Let's move on to the next one, that is the evolution of psychology. I think that this is a very important topic from exam point of view as well because it shows you from where, psychology has started and to where it is, what are the kind of perspectives that we study here. So the first one is by William Wundt, that is introspection. The emphasis on introspection was basically introspection is a procedure in which individuals or subjects in psychological experiments are asked to describe in detail their own mental processes or experiences. I'll give you an example. जैसे अगर आप किसी के पास जाते हो and he's appearing to be sad and you tell them what's going on, you tell me what's coming in your head, and they start describing that उनके mind में क्या चल रहा है. Then they are introspecting. They are describing their own mental processes in detail. So when psychology started, this was one of the approaches that was very dominant. And I think you'll read about it later. Psychodynamic approaches जो हैं वो इनसे बहुत ज़्यादा influenced हैं. The next one is functionalist approach. So functionalist approach said that instead of describing कि mind कैसा है, what is the structure, the kind of thoughts that are coming into our mind, whether there is an unconscious thought or a conscious thought, rather than all this demarcation, all you do is tell me how does the mind work, what is the kind of experiences that are driving people to work, or how are people adapting to their environment. जो उनके environment में जो भी stresses आ रहे हैं या जो भी stimuli आ रहे हैं, जो भी changes आ रहे हैं, वो उनको कैसे respond कर रहे हैं. The third one is Gestalt. It's very confusing, so I'm going to hopefully explain it to you in a way that you understand it. Gestalt psychology is basically one that suggests, of course, it is based on structuralism, and it suggests that instead of looking at the components of the mind, Gestalt psychologists argue that when we look at the world, our perceptual experiences is more than the sum of components of the perception. इसका क्या मतलब है? It's very confusing, I know. Don't worry. इसका मतलब ये है कि, for example, आप घर आए and you are appearing to be very sad. Okay? Your mama comes and she asks, हाँ बेटा mood क्यों खराब है आज? So what are you most likely to tell her? I will give you two options. Number one, are you likely to tell her, I went to school and then I forgot my notebook at home, so my teacher yelled at me, and then I went to tuition straight away, and then tuition maybe my marks, I got my results back, so I didn't perform well, and then I got a bus, and then I came home. Yeah, that's it. That's the series of events that happened to me in the day. That one. Now the other one is कि एक तो मैं आज स्कूल गया, ऊपर से मैं I forgot the notebook, I had done the homework, फिर भी मैं notebook भूल गया, and then the teacher started yelling at me. ट्यूशन में भी मुझे डांट पड़ गई, स्कूल में भी मुझे डांट पड़ गई, so already I was stressed, and then ट्यूशन में भी मुझे डांट पड़ गई और ज्यादा मेरा मूड खराब हो गया. वापस आ रहा था, I stepped into a puddle and I wet my foot. तो ये पूरा सम करके ना मेरा मूड बहुत खराब है, मम्मी मेरे को ये दे दो वो दे दो. Most likely you will say the second one. Why? Because series of events that was happening to you didn't make sense until you summed it up. एक तो पहले ही मूड खराब था, ऊपर से ये हो गया, ऊपर से we keep using these terms, right? So that's what Gestalt psychologists are saying, that in a series, whatever is happening to you, 1, 2, 3, 4, that does not matter. The sum of it matters. Ultimately, at the end of the day, at the end of the experience, how does that make you feel, or what is the meaning of the experience? So the sum is more powerful than separate, entities of experiences. That's what Gestalt is saying. Now we come to behaviorism. Behaviorism is more influenced by Van Pavlov and classical conditioning. I think you will read about it in the future. And learning chapter number 6. So it basically says that everything that we do depends on the external environment. So if I am sitting in this class, it is because someone external has told me to do it. Or if you are attending this class, it's because someone external forces have driven you to attend it. So all the behaviorist branches think that behavior is completely externally driven and learned as a sum of basically as good consequences or bad consequences, and that's how we learn behavior. In short, if you step in a puddle, right, and your foot gets wet, then that's something you don't want to happen, right? So immediately after you do that, you will learn that, okay, next time now I will keep my caution up and I will not step in the puddle. This is an externally driven behavior. So what they think is that all behavior, just like this one, is externally driven. Bahar ki forces are controlling it. So of course we come to the next branch of psychology, which is psychoanalysis. I was describing it. Psychoanalysis describes the structure of the mind. जो introspection में मैंने आपको first topic में बताया था, and we'll read about it in the further chapter. I don't want to confuse you by telling you too much about it as of now. Humanistic perspective is more of influenced by Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow. It is a view that it is a positive view of human nature, and they believe that humans were born to self-actualize. Matlab, humans were born for growth, and we all have an innate feeling to develop our lives. That's what their perspective is based on. Again, more when we go to the actual chapter where we discuss this in detail. Cognitive perspective is focusing more on thoughts. As I said, आपके internal thoughts mind में क्या-क्या आ रहे हैं, which we discussed in the first part, that mental thoughts that are coming, 2 + 2, 4 + 4, इसने मेरे साथ ऐसा क्यों किया, everything that is going on internally in your head. Constructivism is Piaget's view. It suggests that we construct our reality. Now, when we reach chapter 3, again, I will tell you that especially in reference to infants, छोटे babies जो होते हैं 0 to 2 years of age, infants, they explore the world. They try to, grab certain thing, keep experimenting with the world, and they construct the reality around them. That is the view of constructivism, heavily influenced by Piaget. So now we come to a brief understanding of development of psychology in India, which is the next heading. So first, जो हमारी यहाँ पर psychology का start हुआ, that is in Calcutta University, and a lab was first established in 1915. Thereafter, Dr. N.N. Gupta, who was trained in the USA, in the experiment tradition of Wundt. Wundt is the introspection wala banda. So, and then Professor Bose, who trained in Freudian psychoanalysis, again connected to introspection only. They heavily influenced the development of psychology in India. Then breakthrough is when Durganand Sinha wrote a book about psychology in a third world country, Indian Experience. It was published in 1986. Just remember that as a tip. And further down, अब ये जो पहले establishings western side से आई, बाद में Indian society started to challenge them. Indian psychology now tries to derive as many concepts as it can from our traditional grounds, not on what came out from the West. And they started critiquing the West also. मतलब उसको critically analyze करने लगे, what is good and what is bad about the West. They started doing that. Indigenization of psychology started again. Scripture से connect करने लग गए, हमारे Indian values, हमारे Indian experience से connect करने लग गए. In fact, a lot of questionnaires that were used directly copy-pasted from Western countries started getting translated into Indian versions. So, for example, if you take an IQ test here versus you take an IQ test in the USA, there will be two different versions of the same test. Although both of them are in English also, but still, it is an Indian version of the test. So, there are relevant cues related to Indian culture and society. Okay. So this is how it grew, and आज की date में the bottom line is that there are a lot of psychologists who are working in hospitals, in corporate organizations, in IT industry, and a lot of other areas. Okay, so moving on to the next main heading, which is the branches of psychology. Now, there are various fields in which psychology के आप जा सकते हो. As I was explaining earlier, there are psychologists working in a hospital, in a corporate setting, they are working in schools. So you might be confused that ये कौन सी branches हैं where people are getting different kinds of jobs, and all of them come under the overarching term that is psychologist. So what kind of psychologist can I be? So the first one we are going to discuss is the branch of psychology, which is cognitive psychology. Now, cognitive investigates mental processes involved in acquisition, storage, manipulation, transformation of information received from the environment along with its use and communication. Don't worry about the heavy terms, it's fine. It means all the information. It treats all experiences in the form of information. So whatever you're experiencing right now is basically information being collected in your system. So acquisition, मतलब उसको collect करना, firstly introducing it into your brain, then उसकी storage करना. Okay, I saw an eclairs, that's great. I recognize that it is an eclairs toffee, so I picked it up, right? Okay, now next time I see an eclairs, I want to be able to recognize it. So my brain is storing the information, right? That great. Now next time I will come across an eclairs, I will recognize कि यही eclairs है. Now the third is the manipulation. Manipulation is, okay, now I eat the eclairs, right? I manipulate the information. Now what happens? Oh, it tastes really good. Great. So this is also a part of it is stored in my head and manipulated. Okay, eclairs means sweet, something tasty. That is a manipulation of information. Transformation of information received from the environment along with its use and communication. So then I transform it. Okay, eclairs is now under a one category, toffee की category है, उसके अंदर आती है, it tastes sweet, all these kind of information is now in my head. Now I meet a friend, I'm like, have you had eclairs? Try this one. So I communicate and I use that information that was manipulated and stored in my head. ये जो एक एग्जाम्पल है, दिस इज probably how a cognitive psychologist would analyze eclairs, eating eclairs का process. So that's what they do. They work on topics like attention, perception, memory, reasoning, problem solving, decision making, and language. So in order to study cognitive processes, psychologists need to conduct experiments in laboratory settings. Again, this is more of, how we were studying earlier, that natural science or social science psychology. This is more of a natural science bent to it, because they treat experiences as information, and if anything that scientists would probably think that. So it is more towards the natural science bent. Next comes biological psychology. It focuses on the relationship between behavior and physical system, including brain, nerve system, immune system, genetics, I think hormones as well. Yep, that's the endocrinology. So neuroscientists, zoologists, anthropologists, all these people are often collaborate with biological psychologists. Neuropsychology is also within biopsychology. There is this neuropsychology ka branch as well that has emerged as a field where psychologists and neuroscientists, basically neuroscientists kaun hota hai? Scientists of the brain, right? Scientists who study the brain, they work together. As we have discussed earlier, mind and brain की debate चल रही थी that okay, brain has a physical entity, mind की नहीं होती है. So obviously brain जो scientist है वो mind scientist, which is a psychologist, दोनों साथ काम करेंगे तभी we can fully explain behavior. कोई भी एक बंदा behavior fully explain नहीं कर सकता. So it is very natural that they will collaborate. Now researchers are studying the role of neurotransmitters, chemicals which are responsible for neural communication of different areas in the brain, and therefore in associated mental functions. We will do more about this in chapter 3, but I know that until 10th also you have studied that brain में neurons होते हैं, which are cells of the brain, and they are responsible for transferring information from one brain cell to another. So this, what happens when this information get transferred, what chemicals are driving this information, everything कि क्या हो रहा है, that is studied by neuropsychologists, and of course sometimes in collaboration with biological psychologists. Next one is developmental psychology. What is developmental? Now it is a myth that developmental psychology is about infants. No, it's not about just kids. It's about the whole of your lifespan. कि एक छोटे बच्चे से लेके until old age, what kind of developmental processes go out in our mind, how we behave, what kind of behaviors exist. So all this put together is developmental psychology. Yeah, so it studies psychological changes that occur at different ages and stages over a lifespan from conception, मतलब जब तक आप पैदा हुए तब से लेके old age तक, from conception to old age. Now, for them, the primary concern, there is a major emphasis on child and adolescent development, but now it's changing, it is shifting. As I said, it's common myth that developmental psychologists only study kids. Small and infants and children, but that's not true. So all the biological factors that are affecting, socio-cultural factors that are affecting, all of them they will study all together. The next comes social psychology, that explores how people are affected by their social environments, how people think about the influence of others. For example, इसका एक classic example है social facilitation versus social inhibition. Just don't worry about the terminology. What I'm trying to say is कि some people perform better in front of others, right? कि जब आप crowd के सामने perform कर रहे हो, some people will perform better and some people might get nervous, right? So how performing in front of a crowd will affect your own thinking, will affect your own behavior. इस type के जो questions हैं, all of these are covered in social psychology, because social means groups of people, okay? So how groups of people will affect you, how other people will affect you, that comes under social psychology. Then comes cross-cultural and cultural psychology, which is the role of culture in understanding behavior. Now, not to be undermined at all, because this is a very important branch. This will ask essentially the kind of questions that, okay, if you grew up in India versus if you grew up in Japan, if you grew up in Japan versus if you grew up in the United States or in Australia, what are the different kinds of behaviors that you will exhibit that can be attributed to the culture that you grew up in. So, जो आपके culture की वजह से हैं. So, for example, in India, if you are growing up, I think one of the very emphasized sort of thing in our culture, Indian culture, would be religion. A lot of people think कि no matter which religion we belong to, हम लोग सुबह उठ के कभी ना कभी हाथ जोड़ लेंगे, या we can do any other kind of religious practices. So you know that in India, religion is emphasized a lot. So it is a cultural part of India, or हमारे TV shows, हमारे छोटा भीम है, so that's also एक religion का influence है, एक हमारे text और scriptures का influence है, to when we grow up and we are watching Ramayana, Mahabharata, everything that comes on TV. So all this forms a part of a culture, right? Obviously, for American kids, this is not happening. They have a different culture. It's not that they don't have one, but they will watch different kinds of TV shows. Maybe their TV shows are more connected to animals or any certain kind of things that are salient to their culture. That's the difference. Obviously, this, हम लोग जो experience करते हैं अपने culture की वजह से, that obviously affects how we grow up and how we think. Next is environmental psychology, which studies the interaction of factors such as temperature, humidity, pollution and natural disasters in human behavior. Like अगर tsunami behavior आ गया किसी के unfortunately, then what kind of behaviors tsunami survivors, earthquake survivors will exhibit? What is the effect of pollution on the human mind? I think a lot of people, because we stay in northern India, Delhi NCR, a lot of people say that all this pollution that is happening is causing me a lot of stress. So that is actually scientifically valid statement. Pollution does cause a lot of stress, so it can affect your mental well-being. Temperature, if you're living in a hot environment, then maybe you'll get angry easier. I don't know, it's not been done yet. So yeah, but that's the kind of questions that environmental psychologists will ask. Next is a health psychologist. Health psychologist will obviously analyze the role of psychological factors in the development, prevention and treatment of illnesses. अगर किसी को कोई भी mental problem है, for example depression, anxiety or any kind of psychotic disorder, all these kind of why these disorders develop, how can we treat them, what are the the processes with which you can prevent them, all this is studied under health psychology. Common question, what is the difference between a health psychologist and a clinical psychologist, which is the next one we are going to discuss. Clinical psychologists basically deal with the causes, treatment, prevention of different types of psychological disorders. आपको लग रहा होगा definition almost same है, but in some countries the difference is that clinical psychologists have the license to practice. They can actually interact with clients one-on-one, and they can give therapy, they can give treatments. In some countries, it's also there that health psychologists cannot do that because they are more of scientists. They will write research papers, they will do scientific research to inform clinical practice. मतलब वो ये research कर सकते हैं कि ये वाली medicine या ये वाली therapy कितनी efficacious है या नहीं है, लेकिन therapy देगा clinical psychologist ही. So it's a very closely related and very interrelated term. So clinical psychologist is जो आपने सुना ही होगा, they work in hospitals, they work in counseling settings, like that, and they help to treat mental disorders. So if someone's feeling unwell mentally, if you are feeling sad or any kind of anxiety you're facing, any kind of psychotic symptoms you're facing, you are most likely to go to a clinical psychologist. Industrial organizational psychology, ये भी बड़ी misunderstood term है. It is of course it is the people who are in the HR department, but it is also a big branch. It is also part of scientists who study how to enhance team behavior. अगर इस company के सारे employees का motivation बढ़ाना है, so how do we increase the motivation? All those sort of questions are answered by industrial and organizational psychologists. A lot of people work in army relations also, कि military में जो लोग हैं उनका हमें morale कैसे boost करना है, उनकी psychology कैसे study करनी है. That also comes under industrial and organizational psychology. Then there is educational psychology. These people help develop instructional methods and materials used to train people in both work and educational settings. Related field is school psychology, जो कि intellectual, social and emotional development को promote करते हैं और work with the children who have special needs. If someone has any kind of learning disability or MR or any kind of problem, then a school psychologist is more likely to help them. I'm sure that आपके भी school में definitely there will be a counselor and a school psychologist, special educator, also known as that one. So sports psychology applies to principles to improve sports performance by enhancing motivation. Mostly they work on motivation. So if Virat Kohli has not scored a century because he was not feeling so well mentally, he is most likely to go to a sports psychologist, because that they will deal with how to improve motivation in his sport. Hope that doesn't happen. And then there are other emerging branches of psychology like aviation, space, military. As I said, it comes under organizational, but you can make it a sub branch. Forensic, which is very interesting. Criminal psychology भी बहुत लोग पढ़ते हैं, that study of behavior of criminals and why they do certain things. engineering, managerial, community psychology of women, and political psychology. So these are all the terms. Let's come to the next heading, which is themes of research and application. Most common question, what is the difference between research and application? Research means studying something, writing papers on it, उसको अच्छे से experimentation करना, और experiment के बाद कुछ deduce करना कि इस experiment से ये result आया. Now I have written the experiment and results down. ये. Then an applicator will take the paper and apply it to different fields of psychology. Okay, let me give you an example. So for example, a lot of research suggests that if you do physical exercise, that is very much likely to decrease stress levels. So that is the research part that was coming. So people who have researched whether this physical exercise decreases stress or not, those are part of the research department. Now you go to a clinical psychologist and you are saying that my physical activity is pretty low, or I've not been feeling that well, I've been feeling depressed, and that person recommends that, okay, along with the therapy and everything, why don't you try some physical exercise? Then that would be application of the research that was done by the scientists. So that is the difference between research and application. There are certain themes in psychology, which is, I like to call them, so you can say that they are themes or assumptions also in psychology. So the first theme is that psychology, like any other science, attempts to develop principles of behavior and mental processes. So they are trying to develop principles. As I said before, memory, maybe I was giving you an example, that they are trying to come up with a formula that applies to most of the individuals, if not all. So this is what this first theme is trying to explain. They design and conduct experiments or studies under controlled condition on a wide range of psychological phenomena, and the purpose is to develop a general principle about behavior and mental processes. Okay? So this is all this is about experimental, comparative, physiological, developmental, differential, abnormal are generally regarded as the domains representing basic psychology. Basic, I'll explain it to you as it comes in this chapter only. हम लोग next section में discuss करते हैं. यहाँ पे confusing हो जाएगा. ठीक है? So this is the first theme. The second theme is human behavior is a function of attributes of persons and environment. It means कि Kurt Lewin has proposed this excellent equation, B is equal to F of P, E. It means behavior is equal to function of person, environment. मतलब if I, for example, I'm standing under the hot sun, okay, बहुत गर्मी हो रही है, and I'm standing outside and one of my friends is late, we were supposed to meet, right? Then what my reaction will be dependent on who I am as a person, कि मैं ज्यादा गुस्से वाली हूँ या मैं काम नेचर की हूँ, किस टाइप की बंदी हूँ. Secondly, it will depend on the environment, कि temperature कितना हो रहा है, how late that friend is, external kind of sources, right? So my reaction, my behavior will be dependent upon person, me as a person, and the environmental forces, right? Now, I might not react very harshly to it. I'll be just like, why are you late? And we just have a little bit of, argument and then we move on. But someone might respond to it very aggressively because either, मेरे से ज़्यादा गर्मी में खड़े हो वो, मेरे से ज़्यादा time के लिए खड़े हो. Maybe environmental factors can be affected, or maybe because they are a very aggressive kind of a person. So maybe वो ज़्यादा गुस्से वाले हैं. So these are the kind of things that determine our reactions or our behaviors, right? So what kind of person you are and what kind of situation you are put into will determine what kind of behavior you will exhibit. This is essentially what it's saying. The third theme is that human behavior is caused. This is a very, very basic assumption. This is the reason why I said कि ये themes को आप as an assumption भी treat कर सकते हो. Because this is an assumption that human behavior is caused. It means something is causing it. It can be internal also. Again, I said जैसे कि that person might be more aggressive, so he is responding a certain way, or the heat might be a lot, so he is responding a certain way. But whatever the reason is, internal or external, that behavior is caused. It is not just happening out of nowhere. It is not existing in vacuum, right? This is an assumption in most of the sciences that something is being caused. The fourth theme is understanding of human behavior is culturally constructed. As we have discussed this in the previous examples when we were covering cultural psychology, everything that you do is affected by your culture. As I said, कि हम लोग जब छोटे होते हैं, we watch certain kind of movies, certain kind of shows, are exposed to certain kind of scriptures. That is part of our culture. हमारे कुछ नमस्ते है. जैसे for example, very basic example of Indian culture is that we do we fold our hands and we greet people saying namaste. This is part of our culture. This might not be part of the American culture, right? They might say hi, they might say something else. So the fact that I am doing namaste will affect my thinking, will affect my mind, will affect my actions. So this is the fourth theme. Fifth theme is human behavior can be controlled and modified through the application of psychological principles. Fifth theme is, according to me, the most important theme, because why are we doing this? Why are we studying psychology? We are studying psychology because we know that behavior can be controlled. It can be modified. अगर ऐसा नहीं होता तो someone who is feeling low, someone who is suffering from depression would just always be suffering from depression their entire lives, right? It's not that. Psychology के through, therapies के through, आप उनके behavior को control कर सकते हो, modify कर सकते हो. That is the thrust of psychology. So it's very important to understand that behavior can be controlled, it can be modified. So more negative things can be converted into more positive things. That's the aim of psychology. Now we come to the topic of basic versus applied psychology, right? And I think I skipped this part previously because I said मैं आपको आगे बताऊंगी. So here it is. This is a very important line on page number 15. There is no sharp cleavage between research and application of psychology. For example, basic psychology provides us with theories and principles that form the basis of application, and applied provides with different contexts in which theories and principles derived from research can be meaningfully applied. तो आप इसको ऐसा समझ लीजिए जैसे मैंने आपको रिसर्च वर्सेस एप्लीकेशन बताया था. Exactly वही डिफरेंस है बेसिक और अप्लाइड साइकोलॉजी में. बेसिक साइकोलॉजी इज मोर लाइकली टू फाइंड आउट व्हाई समथिंग इज हैपनिंग, क्यों हो रहा है, कैसे हो रहा है, किन कंडीशंस के अंडर हो रहा है, किस पॉपुलेशन पे हो रहा है, राइट? दिस काइंड ऑफ क्वेश्चंस. Applied psychology is more likely to read everything they have written and then apply it to the real world. ठीक है? तो clinical psychologist would most likely be an applied psychology में उसका ज्यादा काम है. Although he is also experimenting, with the consent of patients a lot of time, but mostly he is doing applied psychology. Whereas on the other hand, if you are a cognitive psychologist, then most likely you are a basic psychologist because आप सारे principles को ले रहे हो, you are conducting experiments, you are writing papers, you are doing research. That's what basic psychology is. And everything that can be, applied to a different field. For example, sports psychology, that is more of an applied psychology field. So if you have any questions until here, और आपको basic और applied का difference इतने अच्छे से समझ में नहीं आया, please rewind back to my research versus application, and I'm sure you will understand it. It's very, very akin to that. So the next heading is psychology and other disciplines. This is how psychology interacts with other disciplines. For example, philosophy, the first one we do. Obviously, because psychology also asks why people do certain things, and essentially philosophy भी यही पूछती है that why people are behaving a certain way, how do humans, come to know their motivations, emotions. So there is an overlap between psychology and philosophy. The second one is medicine. As I said, a lot of people go to psychologists for mental disorder treatments. So medicine is something that is, very interrelated with psychology. The role of psychologists in preventing people from engaging in health hazardous behaviors, for example, drinking alcohol, smoking, all these are health hazardous behaviors, or of course engaging in substance abuse. So these are the kind of overlapping concepts that come with psychology. So because health से related जो भी चीजें हैं, that will come under medicine. So that's the overlap. The third one is economics, political science, and sociology. Yeah. So it's actually very important. Yeah, it's actually also connected to mass communication. हम आगे पढ़ेंगे अभी इसी वाले topic में. तो it is a sister of social science because हम लोग अभी डिस्कस कर रहे थे कि psychology whether it's a natural science or a social science. Of course, आपकी जो the economic background, political background, economics में कोई चीज कैसे हो रही है, economics में हम क्या पढ़ते हैं? Behavior of consumers, right? So behavior तो we are studying only. In fact, I remember I read this. This is a very good experiment done by a psychologist, and the award was given to an economist because there was overlap. They were both studying the behavior of consumers, but because consumers term was involved, the Nobel Prize went to economists. Also, sadly, there is no Nobel Prize in psychology. So it is that much of an overlap that they did one study on studying, behaviors of consumers, and it was so intertwined that the economist got the prize. Political science में of course it is connected because voting behavior, कौन किसको vote करेगा, all these kind of questions, what kind of motivations, how can you motivate people to in fact just go and stand up to vote, right? Or how can you motivate them to vote for you? That's the kind of problems we study there. And sociology is also pretty important because sociology is basically dealing with social structures of the society, and as we said, psychology and human behavior is also impacted by social structures, cultural structures. So that's when it overlaps with sociology. Then there's computer science. Computer science mein kaise hai? Because if you're trying to develop a robot, right, an artificial intelligence platform, you will most likely need to understand human behavior if you want to make a robot that's closer to humans. So that's where it is involved. Law and criminology, very interesting field. You must have seen a lot of documentaries on Netflix, etc. How criminal behavior works, how for example, if someone has witnessed a crime, I studied this back in graduation, that if someone has witnessed a crime and you are interviewing them as a witness, then how their behavior, how their psychological blind spots can affect their witness. So sometimes people wo galat witness de dete hain because they are also not aware ki this thing happened to them at the back of their head. So it is very important to understand their psychology. And of course it is important to understand criminal psychology because we don't want crime to happen, right? So the next one is mass communication. A lot of debate around this because aajkal bahut sare media houses are being blamed for forming opinions of people. So it's very important that they also remain unbiased, right? So because mass communication and media are supposed to affect the way people's beliefs are, that's why obviously it is connected with psychology. You have to target human psychology in order to convince someone of something. कि आप इसको vote कीजिए या you support this party, don't support this party, that kind of thing. Music and fine arts, it is more like psychology is dependent on music because a lot of therapies involve music. So it's great if you're practicing that as a hobby, and even fine arts. So architecture and engineering, it is basically to convince your clients that you can work for them. As an architect, just as a person, I feel like you need to know the basics of psychology in order to communicate with people, in order to sell them something, right? So next topic is psychologists at work. Next heading. At work, you can either become a clinical psychologist, you can specialize in behavioral problems, provide therapy. Again, I said if you have a problem, this is most likely where you will go. Then you can become a counseling psychologist, people who suffer from motivational and emotional problems. Counseling psychologists can, I think, most likely to be found in your school. So you can go to the counselor if you are not, feeling like studying, or if you are overwhelmed by a pressure. आपको लग रहा है parents की expectations हैं, this, that, all that can be dealt with a counseling psychologist. Then there's a community psychologist. They deal with problems related to community mental health. There are agencies, private organizations, even आपको पता है marital issues के लिए भी there are psychologists. That if you're having any kind of marital issues, relationship problems, there are government-based psychologists, public support workers, something like that they are called, and you can go to a government hospital and get couples therapy, what we call marital therapy you can get under community. School psychologists, educational systems and their rules vary according to different levels of training. They basically help in the formulation of school policies. Which kind of syllabus is better for students? What kind of exam taking strategies are better? They inform those decisions. And organizational, as I said, human resource development में काम करते हैं. Every institution, every employer mostly hires a HR person to see if their employees are working fine, their mental health is put into a good place, and how to increase productivity. That is also the question that they're answering. So we come to the last topic of this chapter, psychology in everyday life. As we have discussed, a lot of application of psychology is there, and you can watch all the documentaries. I know that you must have seen them. You can watch on how psychology is impacting terrorist behaviors, criminal behaviors, how it is, how trauma is impacting a certain kind of person. You can see it in the people around you, in the events around you. Any kind of event takes place in the world, ऐसा हो ही नहीं सकता that उसमें किसी ना किसी की psychology involved नहीं है. Any kind of unfortunate blast or any kind of terrorist activity takes place. It is an interesting question again, that what is forcing people to do such terrorist activities. There are other kinds of people who will sacrifice their lives for the good and the well-being of others. So again, you want to study pro-social behavior. What is in these people that, आप देखते होंगे, if you watch TV, I might seem a bit outdated, but if you still watch TV and there is an episode of Karmveer on KBC every Friday, so if you watch that, you see people who have done larger than life things. They have devoted their lives for a certain cause. So what is in it, all these kind of people that is enabling them to do it? That is pro-social behavior. Again, that is a branch of psychology. So wherever you look, media may, as I explained it to you, that if your parents are watching certain kind of channels, they are more likely to say certain kind of things, right? So all this media, how it is influencing them, how social media is influencing, thoughts about yourself, how looking at pictures of beautiful women in filters who are, extremely thin and fit, how that is affecting your mental health. Anything that you do, from a swipe up on Instagram to, fighting an election, everything is dependent on psychology. So it is a very important field. I hope I have convinced you to study the rest of the book with me, and I hope you have understood this chapter. If you have any kind of questions, feel free to comment below and do subscribe to the channel. I really hope you enjoyed my video.